Fran has had a love of the sea for many, many years. She's been involved in sailing. She's been involved in sailing on tall ships. She sailed out from England on the Endeavour.
Not the original one.
Not with Captain Cook.
No, although sometimes I won.
She's also sailed on other square rig vessels, and as I said, she's had a lifetime of involvement in sailing. She's had a bit of a fascination for the Titanic, and when there was a cruise organised to reenact the sinking, well, not to reenact the sinking of the Titanic, but to go over the course and celebrate, I suppose, the anniversary of the sinking of the Titanic. Fran was off to England to board. I'm not sure what the vessel was. This one here. What was that vessel?
The Balmoral.
Balmoral. So Fran, along with probably more than 1,000 others, took off and from Southampton, where of course the Titanic took off from, and then she'll tell us all about that, I'm sure. But Fran has also written a book, and it's for sale. She's brought some copies along tonight. If anyone's interested, it's at half price, so it's, and of course she'll sign it as well for you. So we'll certainly have a look at that. What else?
It's probably enough.
Probably enough. Okay. There's one thing. When Pam and I were in North Ireland in June, we visited Belfast, where the Titanic was built, and they built a wonderful museum there called Titanic Belfast. And I put some photos in an album, and afterwards, if anyone's interested, they can have a look through and see what that's all about. But anyway, I'd have great pleasure in introducing Fran Taylor, who's going to give us a story of the Titanic Memorial Cruise.
Thank you very much. And I shan't mention anything about this museum that Terry's been to, because I haven't. And I generally, not yet, it's on the bucket list. They just opened it last year when I was on my way to Southampton to go and join this voyage. They were opening the new museum, so I haven't had time to fit it in yet. Anyway, Titanic Memorial Cruise. I came across that quite accidentally on the internet about 3 years ago now. There was quite a large exhibition going around Australia, and I was looking on the internet to see whether they were going to bring it to Perth. You know, our museums swap the exhibitions, and I accidentally stumbled across this on a link when I was looking for the Titanic exhibition. And it apparently took about 5 years to organise, and I hadn't known anything about it, and I only found it accidentally, as I say. And at that point in time, let me just check now, there were 5 cabins left. This was about 3 years ago. And I thought, and I've been fascinated with the Titanic since I was a child, and I thought, oh gosh, and there's only 5 cabins left to do this, and there's only ever going to be one 100-year memorial cruise. if I don't grab one while they're still available, I'm going to miss out. So it's so easy on the internet. Of course, you got this little button that said, click here, book now. So I did. And it wasn't going to be happening for about another 2.5 years. And I thought, well, in that time, I can figure out how I'm going to pay for it and who's going to come with me. So, yeah, so that was how that sort of came about. And as I said, just accident that I found it in the first place. So on the 8th of April, it was last year, I joined about 1,500 other people in Southampton to board this vessel, the Balmoral. She was selected deliberately, bears no resemblance, of course, to the Titanic, because obviously almost 100 years has passed between the design of that style and that style, but she is of a similar size. So they kept it in because so many of the cruise ships now are, 100,000 tons, and then she's about 45,000 tons, which is the same as Titanic was. So by default, that meant we had about the same number of passengers. And that was sort of fairly deliberately done on the organiser's part. Now, we'd been told in the preparatory paperwork that there would be 2 or 3 evenings that would be formal, and we were encouraged to wear 1912 clothing if we wished. So most of us got that organised. But it hadn't occurred to me remotely. I was thinking on evening clothes. It hadn't occurred to me that people might have outdoor clothes of 1912 vintage as well. There's Titanic herself. That's us punching into a big wave somewhere. That's from the file. I wasn't on board at the time that happened, but it looks quite spectacular. But when we arrived at Southampton Cruise Terminal, we discovered that they had done out the whole terminal in the Titanic flavour. This chappie was one of the lookouts. This lady, who sadly passed away about 18 months before this cruise, she was the oldest surviving passenger. She was a 9-week-old baby at the time the ship went down. Otherwise, she would have been the guest of honour on the ship, as you can imagine. And they had some of the staff there, all in 1912 clothing, and the dining room recreated. This is where we're checking in, just to go and get on board. And the little quartet set up, because everything takes hours nowadays with modern day security. And much to my surprise and delight, I might add, there's always a comedian, someone's had the t-shirt done. There was lots of people turned up in 1912 clothing to actually board the vessel. And there was a few of them stayed in 1912 clothing for the entire trip. So they had really come kitted out. But what I found quite interesting, I'll skip through these reasonably quickly because there's quite a few. What I found interesting is that almost everyone who had 1912 style clothing opted to be in first class categories, including me. Hadn't occurred to me. And I doubt very much whether the majority of us could have afforded to sail as first class passengers, because the cheapest ticket would be about $50,000 in today's money. Well, I'm a sort of self-funded retiree. There's no way I could be doing $50,000 trips. But almost everyone, as you can see, they're all in the stylish clothing rather than in the third class sort of Irish steerage level. This lady was just spectacular. Look at the hat. This is the whole family group. So there's the dad, that's the mum, this is the teenage boy, the 2 younger children. This little girl was delightful. And this is her mother and her father, and they all went as a family group and really made quite a spectacular entrance to the cruise terminal. I think I got on board wearing something like this. It didn't quite fit the picture. This lady I met in the check-in queue, and I complimented her on her rather spectacular hat. and said that because I'd come all the way from Australia, I had canned the idea of a hat, and I just had a fascinator in my luggage because it took up little or no room, but it would be there for the formal evening. And I nicknamed her Molly in my head immediately because she was Texan. And she said, well, honey, I got about 6 of these and I've come all the way from Texas. And she had one of those huge hat boxes, you know, like our grannies used to have. And sure enough, as the trip progressed, you would meet Molly, as I called her. I never actually became friends with her. And she would be wearing yet another spectacular hat. And what was very clever, I thought, was a lot of these bits and bobs on the top of it, this is more for the ladies, they're all detachable. Yeah. So she could mix and match and swap them around. And she wore 1912 clothing the entire voyage. 4 laps around Promenade Deck was a mile. I'm usually at the gym 3 times a week here in Perth, and of course you get fed so well on these things. So I was making quite an effort to be doing a few laps around the prom deck every day, you know, either in my runners and my leggings things. And I would meet Molly sort of promenading, you know, as though she really was the first class passenger, while I'm belting past in my joggers and my tights. This last was the only one that I came across who was in like the 3rd class sort of clothing. First thing we did on board, interestingly enough, actually it's all very much in the news tonight too. Remember, this is April last year. Costa Concordia had just had her incident sunk in the January with the loss of 32 lives. First thing we did was lifeboat drill. Now normally, I'm aware of this because I'm a sailor, you are required under maritime law to conduct safety drills within 24 hours of joining the vessel. But one of the problems with Costa Concordia was the fact that people got on board at 7 o'clock in the evening. This was about 9:30 at night. It's in the dark. They had obviously thought, oh, we'll do it tomorrow, which is within the requirements of the law. But, of course, no one had any idea what to do or where to go. So we all did our lifeboat drill. We were still in Southampton dock, tied up. We hadn't even cast off the mooring lines. So I don't know whether they've changed the rules already or whether they were just being particularly safety conscious. That's the sort of lifeboats we have these days. You can see even the motorised. Compared to that's the sort of lifeboat they would have had to have got into in the Titanic. Open oars, you know, 2 degrees, pitch black at night. Have to get lowered down about 9 stories on the davits. It would have taken quite a lot of courage just to get in the boats. And we also have these life rafts, of course. So there's us just leaving Southampton. Everybody out in the after deck sort of doing the farewells. So first thing we did, I'd never been on anything this luxurious before. I went exploring. This was in one of the atrium public areas. And I found I had a lovely library, and I promptly presented them with a copy of my book, which I've got here because it's all about, well, mostly it's about sailing on the square riggers that I do, and every ship I've been on since then, I give them a copy of my book. It's good publicity, but people enjoy reading it as well. They even had a jigsaw in the library with, remember the lady with the fabulous hat and the family? Look at the outfit. It's almost the same as in this jigsaw. I don't know whether she'd seen a picture of that and had it made. Dining room. This is my cabin. I ended up going on my own because friends who would have liked to come with me decided they couldn't afford it. The ones who could afford it didn't want to come with me, so I thought, well, I'm going anyway. This is a once in a lifetime. Other end of the cabin, you got your own little TV and a whole bit. And of course, inevitably, one of the movies they showed during the trip was James Cameron's version of Titanic. There was all kinds of ribald jokes going about that the next day, you can imagine. And the reason I'm showing you the cabin, so bear in mind I've never been on anything this luxurious. I'm used to sailing on square rig sailing ships, where I'm in working gear, I'm covered in tar, I'm working about 12 or 14 hours a day, I'm going aloft, I'm doing all sorts of maintenance, I'm chipping rust, blah blah blah. This was pure decadence to me. Even I had to take all my nice clothes to wear for dinner in the evening, where usually I dive down to the galley, we get about 20 minutes to shove the food down and then you're back on watch again. That's what I'm used to on the Endeavour. So there's a bit of a difference. Normally we don't have cabins on the Endeavour, we sleep in hammocks in a communal area about this size, and there'll be about 40 people in here, mixed genders. And we normally have to take the hammocks down in the morning and roll them up and store them, because we work in here maybe mending sails or splicing ropes or doing whatever. One day a week on the long voyages we're allowed to leave them up. It's like Sunday, we have a sleep in. So you can see there's still some bottoms in the hammocks there. Now that, and I would share half of one of these chests with one other person, compared to, look at the clothes I took with me. I've even got a safe we got in the cabin. I'd never had anything quite that decadent. It was a real change for me. So when we left Southampton, we followed the Titanic's route. So we swung by Cherbourg in France, although we didn't stop there. Then we went into Cove. Then it's across the North Atlantic to the Titanic wreck site. Then we went into Halifax, which is where a lot of the bodies that were recovered from the sea were taken to Halifax, then ended up in New York, which is where Titanic, of course, should have ended up. Just some of the crew on board, delightful young people, mostly Thai or Filipino. The officers were all Finnish, except for this lady, the cruise director, she was English. Captain was big 6'4", very distinguished looking sort of gentleman who didn't get the joke when we realised his name was Bamberg. Fine if you say it in the two syllables together like that, but if you split it, and his name is Bamberg. We hope this is not going to happen. It took him about 3 days to figure this out, because English is his natural language. Quite rough when we left, which I was enjoying, being sailing that I am. Rainbows, squalls, lovely sunsets, moonlight nights, but not everyone was appreciating the weather. Well, there's a great big squall coming. And about the first 2 nights on board, the dining room was pretty empty, and there was people down with mal de mer all over the ship, which is why all these bags are all the way along the corridor. And one chap, although it wasn't related to seasickness, he had a bit of a heart turn, and we actually had to medevac him and get him off the ship and take him back to England, which took a bit of doing. So I didn't get to see the actual stretcher going up. And I used to work in the oil and gas industry, and I always thought that looked like fun, getting winched up. It's not, trust me. I've done it in training, and it's absolutely awful, because you're spinning like that as you're going up. It's not fun at all. 1 or 2 brave souls got into the spa. The ambient temperature was about 8 degrees, although it was a nice sunny day at that point, but it is the North Atlantic and it's early April. And of course, when you get out of the spa, you're in wet bathers, you've got to pad from there back along the deck to wherever the nearest door is to rush down to your cabin. And I thought, no, I don't think I'll bother. So we got into Cove in Ireland, which was Titanic's last port of call, and a great many of the crew actually came from that part of Ireland. And in spite of the fact that we were hours and hours late because of this medevac that we'd had to take part in, there were thousands of people there to meet us. The whole legend that is the Titanic is so strong still in that part of Ireland. They had competitions, they kept all the shops open and things quite late, and they had competitions across the schools because the youngsters are still being taught about what is now the history of Titanic. Many of them, a great-great-great-grandfather might have been on board, and the stories are getting handed down through the family. And indeed, that's what I'm trying to do with the next book that I'm writing. I met about 50 descendants on board the cruise that I was on, and they all have a family story to tell, and many of them were quite happy to share it. Some wanted to keep it private. And it was really quite cathartic for them. As I say, there was a lot of weeping went on this cruise. It really wasn't knees up Mother Brown and gin and tonic on the back deck. It was very emotional, very educational, very inspirational, and even here in Cove, that had competitions throughout all the schools for shop windows. Now, this shop really went over the top with, they've even got, that's a fouled anchor, which is quite symbolic to a sailor. I'm wearing one, actually. So he's even got the eye of the Titanic in the sign there. More shop windows. This was one of the schools that had put that one together, because it was a commercial opportunity for the local shops as well, I must admit, with us coming in. This one's from Flower Hill Preschool. Bless the heart, they've got this great big chunk of polystyrene there as the iceberg. We never quite figured out whether these were clouds in the sky or other icebergs that were floating, because they're all cotton wool balls. But I mean, they're only preschoolers, God love them. They really made the effort. They know the story. They know the story. And even had the people in the lifeboat down here rowing away. And if anyone has seen the James Cameron version of the movie, you know, there's the shot where Kate Winslet is right. You're not allowed up there, by the way. I've yet to ever go on a ship where a passenger is allowed to go up in that section. It's very dangerous. It's got winches and brakes for the anchor, and it's full of chains and so on. However, James Cameron got away with it. But this one really made me laugh because they've got St. Patrick up here. Look, he's right up in the bow doing, pointing, you know. There's America. So that one was a bit imaginative. This is one of the formal evenings where we got into all our finery. And it was quite delightful to see how many people really made the effort to just get into the whole flavour of the thing. This lass, again, if you saw the James Cameron movie, you know part of the story was the necklace, the heart of the sea. This lass has got a replica of the necklace on. She was intending dropping it overboard at the wreck site, but by about now we have been told the wreck site is actually World Heritage listed. And they asked us, a lot of people brought their own floral tributes and things with them, intending to put them into the sea. And they had asked us not to put anything overboard because it's World Heritage listed. We're much more environmentally aware than we were, say, 100 years ago. So I don't know what became of the necklace in the end because she was asked not to put it over, but it certainly looks very lovely on her. And as I say, everybody was really, even me, there's the fascinator that I talked about. I fitted in the luggage much more easily than I had. I've noticed all the square rig ships up on the wall. Now that's the sort of ship I usually sail on. So this was a bit different. Oh, that was one of the Scots boys that was in on the crew. He was one of the entertainers. And he'd heard my accent by then, so he wanted a picture taken with this lady that looks like Judi Dench. I can't see it, but everybody tells me I look. And this lady that looks like Judi Dench, but who sounded Scots, who lives in Australia, who was on this cruise. That's an interesting combination. Don't meet people like you every day. Or the set-up Terry spoke about this. This is the grand staircase on Titanic. You spoke about it. You mentioned they've got it set up at the museum in Belfast as well. So they had that as a backdrop, so that you could pose in front of it, as though you had just come down the staircase, you know, in your nice 1912 clothes. So some of my dining companions, that was a challenge. This couple were French. She spoke no English at all. His English was as bad as my French was. This last Swiss, who spoke both English and French, thankfully, and was the sort of go-between and her nephew's over here. He was also Swiss and speaks English, French. So their English was better by the time they got to New York, and my French was better by the time we got to New York. It was quite a lot of fun. Again, this is a formal night, and they had a lot of the staff were in their national costumes, looking absolutely lovely. They had a couple of photo shoots out on the after deck. Now, this was rather amazing, I found, given how far away Southampton is, and we all had to go there to join the ship and do the cruise. There were 297 Australians. There were 1,500 passengers. You can do the math. Yeah, that's an extraordinary percentage. Now, obviously, I didn't get to meet everybody, so I don't know what everyone's real interest was that took them, you know, to the other side of the world to go and do this cruise. I'm sure we've all got different reasons, but there was almost 300 of us. It was amazing. Another quite big group, although they're not all there that day, was the Irish. And then they did another series of photo shoots. There's the lady with the spectacular outfit, and a wee girl looking lovely, with all the nice 1912 clothing, as they would have been strolling the promenade decks in the old days. Oops. Let me back up here. Okay, take it slowly. So, they set up an area in the library where the people who had brought tributes to put overboard at the site, who were now not allowed to, could put them all in the library, and then they opened it up and we all could go in and take photographs and so forth. Again, I'll flick through these reasonably quickly because there was many of them. People had come on board in Southampton with arrangements like this that had them in the ship's cool room to keep them fresh until we got to the 14th of April, which of course was the anniversary date. And so they spread them all out in the library, and we could all go in and just pay your respects, and it was all very, it wasn't at all touristy, I'm happy to say. It was very respectful and quite sombre in lots of places. And we had a lot of historians and experts and lecturers on board who were giving us information every day about the Titanic, about the building, about what the discoveries that we're doing now, because they've brought up sections of the hull, they've had metallurgists examine it. We've got X-ray technology and MRI technology and things now that they didn't have before. So we were getting information about this all the time. But the ones that I found that were really, really moving were the people who had had a family member on board. They were either a descendant of either a survivor or a victim. And it was mostly those who were leaving these tributes. As you can see, there's quite a number of them. From various different countries. And we had oh yes, I nearly forgot, I was delighted to see that there was even a tribute from Australia, from the government and the people of Australia. There were 6 Australians on board the Titanic when she went down, which I hadn't known about prior to this voyage. but someone had and stirred up their local member of parliament and said, what are we doing to recognise the 100th anniversary of the Titanic sinking? And he went, oh, don't know. Let me find out and get something done. And indeed they did. Those are the 3 official reefs that did get cast into the sea at the site, and they've all been specially made. There's no florist's wire or anything in them. Everything that's in it's all biodegradable. And one was from the company, the shipping company of the ship that we were on, which was Fred Olsen Cruise Lines. One's on behalf of the passengers, and the simpler one at the end is from the Missions to Seamen. We had on board, there was a Catholic priest, an Anglican minister, and padre from the Missions to Seamen. And the padre from the Missions to Seamen was one of the last people in Ireland to speak to the crew on the ship before she left Cove, so it was very appropriate that they were represented on this cruise. And indeed the Missions to Seamen is still alive and well and very active and does an awful lot of good work all over the world. The Flying Angel Club down here at Fremantle is run with the Missions to Seamen. So here we are gathering on the after deck. We had 2 memorial services indoors, one Catholic, one non-denominational, or multi-denominational would be better description, at 11:20, which is when, have I got that wrong? Somewhere around there, 11:20, I need to check my notes. Were the indoors one at the point where, which was the time where Titanic struck the iceberg. And we had the one outdoor service, 11:40 on the 14th, which was when Titanic struck the iceberg. And then one on the after deck, which is what we're gathering here for, at 2:20 on the morning of the 15th, which was when she actually went down. We got special permission to fly the White Star flag on our after staff, which you're not really allowed to do. Wherever the ship is registered, that's where the flag that you should fly on, that flagstaff. But we got special permission to fly the White Star Line's flag on that night. And we're all gathering here. It was, given the rough weather that we'd had before that I showed you some slides of, this was almost spooky. It had all calmed down. You can see that the water in the pool is quite level and not slopping around. The sea was very calm, as it was when Titanic went down. It was a very black night. There was no stars, there was no moon, as it was the night Titanic went down. Now, it could well be that that's the normal cycle at that time of the year, at that part of the world, but we all thought it was a bit spooky, given we'd been rocking and rolling and now it was all very calm. It was about 4 degrees. It was freezing cold. We were all rugged up in thermal undies, Gore-Tex jackets, woolly socks, the whole bit. 100 years ago, people didn't have all of that. I was shivering at one point and made some comment about, I was freezing. And the chap that was next to me said, we're not even in the water yet. Oh, it was very, very sobering. And it was a very nice service. I mean, obviously the whole ship was there. There was another ship had come out from New York, because many of the people who died on the Titanic were wealthy Americans. And they were doing something similar from the New York end. They'd come out to the wreck site. You can just catch a glimpse there because he's got his robes on. That's some of the clergy who took the service. And lots of nice readings, and the ship's quartet was there playing. I just lost the plot when they got to for those. I was just hanging on to my composure until we got to For Those in Peril on the Sea, and I can't even talk about it without getting choked up. It was enormous. It really was enormous. We were. That's the other ship. It's not very good because she's too far away. There's the two crew in the dress uniforms and their gloves and things about to cast the wreaths into the sea. We felt, many of us, we spoke about it the next day and the day after that, and many of us really felt, I don't know, a presence. We felt there were spirits about, we felt something. One of these things that you really couldn't quite put into words, but it was a very, very strong emotion when we were out having the service. And some of my friends before I left said, you know, it was a bit of a macabre sort of thing to do, and I said, no, I don't see it like that at all. I said, I know you go and visit your mum's grave every Christmas, every anniversary of her death, every Mother's Day, and on her birthday. I said, I don't see this as being any different. I just have to get on a boat and go a bit further and go and pay my respects to all these people who lost their lives that night, because as a result of all of this, still deemed to be the greatest maritime tragedy in contemporary history, they have made it safer for me and everybody else who's come after them to go to sea. So I want to go and pay my respects. Oh, I hadn't thought about it like that, he said, but that was really how I saw it when I was there. When we came in, this is out in the after deck. As you can see, it's very well lit. Normally there wouldn't be that many lights on out the back. And when we came back inside after the service was finished, very quiet, very reflective. Someone noticed this, which I took a photograph of, because it really does look like a cross. What it actually is the light from the after deck shining through the chink between where the curtains on the big windows don't quite meet in the middle, and the chink along the top, like up there, where the curtain rod would be. But because of all those lights on the after deck and when we came in and they turned around to speak to the people behind you, oh my God, look at that. And here was this cross. Yes, it was very, almost hair on the back of your neck stuff. So after we left the wreck site, the next stop was Halifax, which is where a lot of the bodies that were recovered from the ocean were taken. And I made a beeline. I've actually been to Halifax before a number of years ago. I had to join a ship there in the year 2000 to race across the North Atlantic in the Millennium race. And I knew they had a fabulous maritime museum there, which has a fabulous Titanic memorabilia collection. And we only have limited time in Halifax. So I went straight to the Maritime Museum and discovered some more exhibits that I hadn't seen on my first visit. Things haven't changed. That is still the case. Things haven't changed there. That's much still the case. The ship I was on was one class, I might add, but there were people who were in the very expensive suites up there, which is where Molly, my Texan friend, was ensconced. That they weren't rude or anything, but they just didn't. I was on about the 5th deck down. They just didn't mix with the likes of me that they met on the deck and the joggers and the shorts, while they were strolling. So things haven't changed. That made me laugh, because when I emigrated out here in 1966 as a single girl, a 19-year-old, the girls were at one end, and the single lads were at the other, but didn't stop us meeting in the middle as the weeks went by. And that hasn't changed either. The crew are usually right up in the forecastle, which is one, if you might think on a ship when she's pitching like that, That's one of the most uncomfortable places to be. And if you run aground or there's a collision, yep. So 100 years later, things are still much the same. They have got the only remaining deck chair that was recovered from the site on display at this museum, and it's in a glass thing, and it's all been sprayed with glycol, so forth, to stop it, rotting. But they have got a replica with the backdrop of the deck behind it. That's my Texan lady, that's Molly, the unsinkable Molly Brown, posing in the deck chair with her husband, who interestingly is in third class gear. She's in the fancy clothes, but he's in the third class gear. And the most poignant thing of all, I think, oh yes, I discovered that someone invented a board game, can you believe, called The Sinking of the Titanic. How crass. How absolutely crass. Didn't stay on the market very long, thankfully. Took it off. And some of these things I hadn't seen when I was there in the year 2000. And the most poignant thing of all are these little shoes. Now, there's an incredible story to these shoes. One of the ships that went out to recover the bodies was called the Mackay Bennett. She was a pipe-laying ship. And the guys who were on her are used to doing some fairly awful sorts of jobs, or did work on her, it's almost 100 years ago. And we're used to fairly rough conditions, because where Titanic went down, it's not far from the Grand Banks. Normally it's a very rough area. This old gentleman passed away in about 2006, I think it was, who used to work on the Mackay Bennett. And, no, 2010. When the family were cleaning out his home and a couple of trunks and things in the attic, they found these little shoes. And on the bottom of them it says, Titanic, sunk. So they handed them into the authorities. They think he must have taken them off as a small child, that was recovered when they went out to get the body, and they've been in his trunk ever since. And because of today's DNA technology, I'm sure you've all heard about the unknown child. He's unknown no more. I actually talk about this in my book that I wrote in 2008, and they had previously identified him as a little Finnish boy, but that's now been proved wrong. And this is him, young Sydney. Youngest of a family of 8, and they all perished, and his was the only body that was recovered. And he's buried in one of the graves in Halifax. There's 3 cemeteries there, and that's sort of direction to where we're heading. That's the Jewish one, there's a Catholic one, and there's a multi-denominational one. They're very big into the whole marine heritage thing of it. This is, as I saw it in the year 2000, that was the memorial erected to the memory of an unknown child whose remains were recovered after the disaster to the Titanic, April 15th, 1912. Since they've identified him, they've now added this extra bit with his name. As the day wore on, and because it wasn't just us who were feeling the anniversary, there was, people, locals who lived in Halifax, who would have had ancestors who were there when all these bodies were brought. As the day wore on, you can see what happened to his little grave, bless him. There was teddy bears and there was flowers and there was a lot of people visited the graveyard that day to pay their respects. That was one of the bandsmen who supposedly was still on the deck when the ship went down. That was left by his descendants. Quite a simple little graveyard. It made me think a little bit like some of the military ones that are they're tasteful and they're very subdued, and they're very, very well kept, and so was this one. I took a few of the gravestones. I'll flick through these quickly. Look at the ages, 8, 6, 4 and 2. Shocking. I took that one because he was one of the Australians that was on board that I hadn't known until I did this. They think that was the father of Melvina Dean, the 9-week-old baby, the last survivor. I took that one because it was erected by J. Bruce Ismay, who was the chairman of the White Star Line and who has always been portrayed as one of the black sheep of the whole thing, because he was telling the captain to go faster, like the other boiler. Well, if we get into New York early, think of the publicity we'll get. He couldn't have been all, and he survived, so he couldn't have been all bad, I reckon. Oh, again, going back to Cameron's version of the movie, Leonardo DiCaprio's character in the movie was Jack Dawson. Well, it is a J. Dawson, and he did die on the Titanic, but it certainly wasn't Leonardo DiCaprio. But the guide who is there, resplendent in his kilt, I might add, more Scots than I am, they're very, Nova Scotia, if they've got any family connection at all, he said he cannot stop Japanese tourists all coming. I'm going, Jack, Jack, and they all gather around the gravestone to get the picture taken with Jack Dawson. And he said, I haven't got the heart to tell them they're wrong. So, on a lighter note, we're almost at the end of the voyage here. A couple of days before we got into New York, there was a wedding on board. This girl's, let me check. Her great-grandfather had been on Titanic, and she had arranged with the padre from the Missions to Seamen, because it used to be that a ship's captain could marry you, but that's no longer recognised as legal. But we had 3 clergymen on board, so, she arranged with the Missions to Seamen padre to marry her and her fiancé, and deliberately had a very 1912 style wedding dress with the gloves and the whole bit, just as a tribute to her great-grandfather, and we all thought that was rather lovely. And then, of course, we passed the Great Green Lady on the way into New York, which is where Titanic should have ended up. That's the other ship that came out from New York to the wreck site to pay their respects as well. And I had a couple of days in New York before I flew out. And of course, 2 of the people who died on the disaster were the Strausses who started Macy's department store. And I was rather intrigued. I've heard of Macy's, of course. I'd never been to America before. But I think we all know we've heard of Macy's. But I didn't know that they have adopted the White Star Company flag as the store's logo, if you like, even to the point where the apostrophe in Macy's is the little white star, just to pay their respects to their founder who died in the disaster. That was just a shot out the plane window. I managed to jag it. Manhattan at night as you're leaving. And that was sort of the end of a very emotional, very educational, very informative, and certainly a once-in-a-lifetime voyage for me. I doubt there will ever be another one similar. If there's another one in, say, 50 years, no, I'm still not going to be here. Certainly in another 100 years I wouldn't be here. But what's happening now is the marine organisms and the rust and things that are getting into the ship, they believe within about 20 years, the experts, that she will have rusted to the point where instead of staying upright with the bow still looking like that, we had 5 or 6 of the people on the ship in the expert category have been in the submersibles that go down to see it, and it takes about 4 hours to travel from the surface down to where the ship is. She's 4 kilometres down. And because you're then depending on batteries and stuff once you're down there, they turn all the lights off on the way down. Now, I would love to do that, but I would hate that middle bit. You're in pitch black, going down, 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 down for about 4 hours. And they all said, they did it at different times, and they all said, when they put the big floodlights on, because they, with all today's technology, they know when the ship's, you know, just round along there sort of thing, we're almost there. And you see the bow rail, and she's still standing upright. It just absolutely makes you gasp, you know, coming out the blackness to see that. Well, they think within about 20 years, that will no longer look like that, because all the marine organisms are eating it away to the point where she's going to collapse in on herself. So whether there will ever be another memorial voyage at some point in the future remains to be seen. And it's extremely doubtful whether I would still be on this mortal earth to go and do it again. Anyway, certainly not in 200 years. And while I was away, of course, Clive Palmer made his amazing announcement about he's going to rebuild a replica. I didn't know anything about that until I got back to Australia, and I thought my partner was just, I've been fascinated with this for years and years and years. I really thought he was just winding me up when he said, do you know they're going to build a replica? I suppose you want to go on that bloody voyage as well. You know, and I went, you're kidding. And then, of course, as the months have gone by, I've found out a bit more about it. But I think I'm going to have to write a bestseller and send him a complimentary copy and get myself invited on board as a guest speaker, because somebody's already offered him $1 million for a ticket. And there's no way I'm going to be able to afford to go on that one. That's if it all comes to fruition. But plans have been drawn up, and there's contracts let, there's a Chinese shipyard engaged, and it's actually quite amazing. Half of me is amused by it, and the other half thinks, what an extraordinary thing, why didn't somebody else do it before this? But, you know, over here, we don't know Clive Palmer that well over here. He's sort of eccentric, yes, regarded with a little bit of interest and amusement, shall we say. And of course now he's gone into Parliament, or did he win, by the way? I haven't heard the latest. They're still counting. They're still counting Fairfax. So 2016, supposedly, Titanic 2 is getting launched, and we'll be setting sail from Southampton to New York. So if you all buy a book from me tonight, ladies and gents, I'll start to save up my pennies, because, yeah.
Would you go?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, I would sell my soul to go. Definitely. To get the chance to walk down that staircase in 1912 clothing and just, oh yes, oh, I would go.
How long did the trip take?
12 days for me, yes, from, yeah. I don't really know quite why I'm so fascinated with the Titanic. When I was about 11, where I grew up on the west coast of Scotland in a little town called Helensburgh, it's on the River Clyde, one of the early movies that they made that some of you might remember, it was called A Night to Remember. It was based on Walter Lord's book. Kenneth More was in it, he was one of the famous ones, about the Titanic sinking. And all what my mother referred to as the watery bits, the sinking and the rowing and all this stuff, it was all filmed around Helensburgh, where I grew up. And the local paper had an advert in the paper asking for extras for the making of this movie. Well, the whole town turned up. You know, there's only about 3,000 people in the town. We all turned up to go and be extras, but there were some requirements. You had to be able to swim, and if you were under 15, which I was about 10 or 11, I trotted along to go and sign up. I was quite happy. I've always been an adventurous sort of kid. If you were under 15, you had to have either a parent, an older sibling, or a guardian who was over 15 with you, and they all had to be able to swim. And I was the only one in my family that could swim. So I never got to be an extra in the movie. Well, it took about 4 months, and you can imagine a little town like that. The local paper milked this story for all it was worth. You know, the cinema people said this, and the movie people were seen doing such a thing, dad, lad, lad. And in due course, we went to see the film as a family when it was finished, and I found it was hilarious because I mean, it wasn't supposed to be, but I was used to seeing like Mr. Dean's the butcher and his blue and white striped apron, and here he was in evening clothes and a top hat. Oh, there's Mr. Dean's, you know. And Mr. Spy the coalman, who I don't believe in all my 11 or 12 years I ever saw clean, not through any fault of his, just because in those days there was still humped bags of coal on the shoulder. Drop the coal down the chute, dust. There was Mr. Spy in his top hat and his tails and the whole bit. Came out the pictures, sort of said to my dad, you know, what a great film, and wasn't it a hoot seeing so and so and so and so and all this sort of thing. And he said, but Fran, it wasn't just, well, Francis, he always called me. He said, it wasn't just a film. He said, that's a true story. That was when I hadn't known that. And that really just, he said, all those people died that night. And I've been just fascinated with it ever since. To my 11-year-old mind, you know, how could anybody have let that happen?
Well, how did it, I mean, I know that Titanic is an iceberg, but how did the captain and the officers allow that to happen? You said they were going too fast?
There's about 3,000 books being written about this, and there's lots, of course, with today's technology, as I say, there's lots of theories put forward. If you ever watch, there's a program on TV called Air Crash Investigations, and when they get to the bottom of some of those, it's never just one thing. There's a series of things, and I personally think that's been the case here. They were probably going too fast because they shouldn't have been doing more than 20 knots in a known ice field. Some of the ice warnings didn't get to the bridge because they got stuck on the spike, because the wealthy passengers on board were using the radio operator to send messages out. In those, one of the big things that got changed after the Board of Trade investigation into it, don't forget it's 100 years ago, no radar. Radio was new. They did not require radio operators on ships to be on duty 24 hours a day. So some of the ships that were closest to the Titanic, their radio operator had knocked off, shut his radio down and gone to bed. So they didn't get the distress calls. That was one of the first things that got changed. So was the number of lifeboats that a ship carried. When Titanic was built, she was, Terry, you can probably keep me right on this, I'm sure it says so in the museum. I think she was the biggest moving man-made object that had ever been built at that time. Something like that, about 45,000 tons. Now, the number of lifeboats that she was carrying were the number that was prescribed by the British Board of Trade for the biggest ship that had been built prior to that, which was about 10,000 tons, because they all thought, nobody will ever build a ship bigger than 10. We don't need any more lifeboats. So they complied with the rules, but the rules were desperately inadequate. If those rules had been changed before the ship sailed, and she'd had more lifeboats on board, the ship would still have sunk, but less people would have died, and so on and so forth. Now there's some evidence. We had a metallurgist in among the experts on this cruise, and there's some evidence that some of the rivets that were used, because they're all melted in pots and poured into moulds and so on. And you're allowed to have a certain percentage of slag in the mix, in the melt. But as they were getting closer to the end of the building, there is some suggestion that a higher percentage than had been getting tolerated up until now was coming out of the pots and put in the moulds that made the rivets. So then the rivets are getting hammered in to the plates, okay, at that point, and you might have, so you've spent 3 days working on this plate, and it's all been the same batch of steel, so you've got the same percentage of, a higher percentage of slag in that batch of steel that have all gone in the one plate. Now, if they'd been scattered around, maybe it wouldn't have mattered, but there's a weak point there. Where did the iceberg hit it? On the side. Some of the rivets popped, and so there's information that we know now that we couldn't possibly have known back then. And you come back to, you know, the captain's on board, but so is the chairman of the company, who's his ultimate boss, who's telling him to light the last boiler and make her go faster. Look how calm the sea is. We've got no illness. There's no reason we can't be doing 22 knots. It would be a brave captain that would tell the chairman, especially 100 years ago, no, you know, because it would cost him his job. We don't know if the fourth boiler was ever lit. We don't think so. Something I picked up on, another story that was around was the two guys who were up in the crow's nest, the lookouts. They should have had some binoculars, and they didn't. And the guy who was the first officer who had left the ship, the ship actually sailed from Belfast to Southampton in the first place. And then some of the crew changed over to do the maiden voyage. That was the delivery voyage from Belfast to Southampton. The man who was the first mate on the Belfast to Southampton didn't stay on for the Southampton to New York, the maiden voyage. And he had the binoculars that accidentally went home with him that should have been passed on to the lookouts. That's another theory that I've heard. And as a sailor who's been out, I've sailed the Atlantic, I've sailed the Pacific, I've sailed the Indian, I'm up the mast, I'm on lookout. I don't think that would have made a tuppenny hoot, personally. Because on a very, very dark night, a real black night, when you've got no moon and no stars, your vision actually adjusts further without binoculars. You can scan. You can't see what it is, but you can see there's something. Then you get the binoculars and you look. If you're just doing that, you've got tunnel vision and your eyes don't seem to, the peripheral vision doesn't open up as well. That's just my opinion as a sailor. I mean, I've just sailed from Cape Town to Fremantle on one of the Dutch straw ships that was just in. We had a competition going a few hours out from Fremantle. We only do about 4 or 5 knots. It's a sailing ship. They had a notice up on the board, and you had to write your name on it and nominate a date and a time when you first sighted land. It was 34 days from Mauritius to Fremantle, just water. It was a long, long haul. And people are putting up various things, of course, and I know my way around here, and I know the first thing we're going to see. So I asked, I said, does a lighthouse count as land? And they went, yeah, we'll allow a lighthouse. I said, does the light from a lighthouse count as land? You see the flash long before you see the lighthouse. A little conference on that between the captain and the first mate, and they said, yeah, all right, we'll allow the flash. I said, I'm going to win. So I worked out what speed we were doing, how far away we were. I know, well, the furthest away at this point I've seen it, I can see the Rottnest Lighthouse 20 miles, nautical miles, at sea. I actually, and I did win, I actually got it this time 25 miles away. I got the flash because they didn't believe me. I was on watch, and I came down to the deck and they expanded the radar out far enough, and they went, and I said, get your binoculars, come up on deck. And I said, Stanley, it's about every 7 seconds you get along, and then, because every lighthouse has a different flash, so you can check it on the chart. And the captain's standing there and he's saying, I can't see anything. And I said, well, don't use your binoculars, just stand and look that way and kind of do the Chinese squint. Oh, I've got it, he says. So that reinforces my idea that the binoculars theory wouldn't have made that much difference on Titanic. But there's so many different thoughts about it. And like, should he have, if I'd been the officer of the watch, I would have done exactly what the first officer did. I would have thrown the wheel hard port, I would have put it in reverse, and it's probably the worst thing that you could have done, because if the ship had hit it straight on, they might have flooded about 3. They'd have stove in the bow, all the people up there would have got killed, and they might have flooded about 3 compartments, but she wouldn't have sunk, because she could still float with 4 compartments flooded, but not more. But because, there's the iceberg, so because he tried to avoid it, as I say, she would, natural, hard port, it came down the side, and that's where the rivets began to pop, and the plates went, and that one flooded and went over the top, and that flooded. There's another one, the watertight door should have gone right to the... So, what sank the Titanic? In another 100 years, they'll still be discussing it, I reckon. There's a whole lot of bits in the jigsaw puzzle. But, yeah, it was an extraordinary voyage to sort of be a part of, and go and pay my respects and meet all these people, and some of the family stories, and that's what I'm trying to capture in the book I'm working on now. Some of them need to be written down before they're lost altogether, with the passing of time. And I thought, well, you do it.
Well,
so I'm trying. I'm done. I'm done. I'm done. I could go on for ages. It's a topic. Well, the whole business of the sailing and being at sea, and the experiences I've had and the people I've met. I've been very, very fortunate, and it's something I get quite passionate about, especially if I do a lot of these talks to schools and library groups as well, and I mostly focus on, when I do the schools, on the Lewin, because that's where it all started for me, with the square rig sailing, and her primary focus is the 15 to 25-year-olds and youth development and so on. And I mean, quite truly, me sailing on the Lewin has changed my life, because from that point on, then this happened, then that happened, and then because I've done that and that, then and so it went on, and I try and I get that across to these kids. So I say, well, if that could happen to me in my 40s, imagine what it's going to do for you at 16, kind of thing. So I get a bit passionate.
You do, and rightly so. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please join with me? That's a very, very small
Thank you very much.
gift in appreciation of your time.
I shall wet my whistle.
That's fantastic. I forgot to mention, Pete, while you're still there, that tonight, I think it's the 16th, is that right? 16th of September?
16th September, yeah.
2013, we need that for our records.
Oh, yes, you do.
Fran, honestly, you're so passionate about this, and you've put in so much time on it. It's just a wonderful talk, and no wonder your talk goes around the state, and Rotary clubs and Probus clubs.
Well, and it's something that I love to share. It's something that I like to share with people, because what I've found, excuse me, just sort of shutting this down the proper way, sometimes people come and help me pack up and they just shut the lid on it and the computer doesn't like it. What I've found a lot with particularly, you know, the sort of age group that's here, is some of you people might have grandchildren that are in 16 to 18 to 19 and think, oh, I wonder if how they go with the voyage on the Lewin, you know, and I just, because I mean, the Lewin needs the support to keep going, and we've put, I think it was about, last count it was about 38,000 youngsters we've put through the programme on the Lewin since she started sailing, and it's a wonderful medium. And it just gives them such, you know, great experiences and things, and develops their confidence and teaches them a bit about sharing and working as a team and a bit of discipline and a lot of the things they're not getting in school these days, I might add. So, yeah, so I do get passionate about it, because there's the next generation of Lewinites that will keep the ship going for another 25 years, hopefully.
Well, thank you again.
You're welcome.
Fran did bring along a book. If
Oh,
anyone
yes.
would like to purchase a copy of the book, it's $10. It's normally $20.
On special, actually the bookshops charge even more than that, because of the time they all add the markup and everything on it. But I'm trying to clear my stock now, because I'm working on my next book, and I'll need some room. I self-published, so I'll probably need some room for the next one, or I'll be getting divorced. My hubby will be going, oh God, not another load of books.
So, folks, before we break and have a cup of tea or coffee, as usual, we have a raffle, and if anyone wants a ticket, hasn't got a ticket, or if we're all fixed for tickets, I'll ask Fran if she would please draw one out of this little container.
I'm going to say, I get this honour every time I'm a guest speaker somewhere, and I'm going to get blamed for something one day, I'm sure. There we go.
Thank you.
Green C28 028.
No. Val?
Oh, lovely. Well done.
There you go.
Well, congratulations.
There we go.
Now, you don't want that. No, you can. I'll put it in with the rubbish. Thank you. Now, the prize is a bottle of red wine, a bottle of white wine, or chocolates. But you can't have chocolates tonight because I neglected to get them. I went to the cupboard. I thought there was chocolates in the cupboard.
Terry, that's
Not
a
there.
cop
So
out.
I'll bring them around tomorrow. I'll bring them around tomorrow, I promise. No, I'll bring them tomorrow, Val.
But you have the wine tonight.
No, she'll get chocolates tomorrow. Folks, I mentioned when Pam and I were in Belfast, we went to this museum that they'd built, opened last year in March, I think. Magnificent building. I don't know if anyone else has been there. The Rue Davies has been there, no? Well, this building is 6-storey high, and it's sort of, from a distance you look at it from different directions, and it's like the bow of a ship here on 4 sides, 4 corners, and it looks like the bow of the Titanic. The people who built the Titanic, Harland and Wolff, they were one of the largest steel manufacturing businesses in the world. I think at one stage they employed 35,000 people. When they built the Titanic, they built 11 rather large ships, not as big as the Titanic, but they built 11 that year. They built, they were anyway, the land where the dockyards and the shipyard was, shipbuilding of course went out of vogue when they introduced aeroplanes to travel between countries, and so the shipbuilding went pretty much by the board. And so that dockyard sort of closed down and everything became derelict. And they were going to redevelop the area for residential. And this trust of the Harlan family, they stepped in and bought the land. Evidently the government had then become owners of the land. They bought the land and they started this evidently a campaign to build a museum to the Titanic. And the building, you know, is 6 stories high, and you go up beautiful escalators to the top, and the top 2 floors are like the dining room of the Titanic. Magnificent setup. It's a corporate, people can hire the building. And then you get on like a little train and you come down through the floors of the building. You go through all sections of the shipyard, if you like. And Fran mentioned the riveting and that. But as you come down in this train, you go past sort of windows and you look at it and they're all aspects of the shipbuilding as you're coming down. And there's the riveting and the noise and people talking and, you know, yelling and blokes sort of hammering the rivets of Fran tells us some pop, they weren't hitting them hard enough or something, but you know, and there was ovens where they were heating the metal, where they were bending the shape of the frames, and magnificent setup. It just really, if you ever get the chance of going there, have a look. Anyway, I put some photos that I took while I was there, and they're there if anyone wants to have a browse through. It's just something really worth seeing. They've done a fabulous job. All right, enough of that.
Did anybody see the exhibition of the Titanic artefacts that was touring a few years ago? That was how I stumbled, researching that to see whether it was going to come from Melbourne to Perth. I came across this cruise, you know, and the rest is history, as they say. And the short answer was that it wasn't, so I flew through to Melbourne, just basically to go and see this exhibition. Yes, the book fashion brand. And they had, it was very well done as well. They had 7 galleries set up, so you went from sort of one, and you went to go into the place. It was as though you were going up the gangway and onto the ship, and that was sort of, you know, your reception area and collecting tickets and things. And the first gallery was set up as though you were in the shipyard. And then the next gallery was set up like as though it was the day the ship was getting launched and coming down the sliding ways and so on. And the sound effects and things they had playing in each room, similar to what you were just saying there, yeah. And the last gallery was the gift shop, inevitably. But the second last one was, they had a room probably about this size, pitch dark, except for little tiny pinpoint lights in the ceiling, with an iceberg. This is in Melbourne in January. It's about 40 degrees outside, and they had an iceberg in the thing, and I thought, it has to be fake. So of course I had to go and have a feel at it, and it wasn't, it was real. They must have been freezing this every night for the exhibition the next day. And I mean, it was, yeah, that was hair on the back of the neck stuff as well, really. It was just extraordinary. So I'll have to go and see the
You have to go and see that.
Belfast,
That's something
yes.
you need to see.